I was born in Burlington, Vermont, and lived there, went to school, grammar school with the Daughters of the Holy Spirit, and then to a larger central Catholic high school outside of Burlington, where we had mostly Sisters of Mercy, but other sisters too. Because it was central, we had some Presentation Sisters and Providence Sisters. My family was an interesting family. We were 5 children that were of both my mother and my father. My father was much older than my mother and had a previous marriage, so I had 2 half-brothers. And my first experience of them, they are 18 and 17 years older than I. My very first experience of them was when I was about 3, and they came home from the Korean War. I maybe knew them, maybe had met them when I was a baby, but I don't remember any of that. And so it was like all of a sudden I had 2 brothers that I didn't know about. And in the end, one of them made the Army his career, so spent most of his life either overseas or he married someone from the South and they lived in Oklahoma, Texas. I probably saw him 5 times in my life. My other older brother chose to live with us and stayed with us until he got married, and I was 17 when he got married. So in my family, as I was growing up, we were almost 3 adults and 5 children. I'm in the middle, a brother and sister older, and a brother and sister younger. My older brother has died at 33. So we were just kind of growing up in Burlington, Vermont. I lived in the city and always was, I just took the city for granted, although my father's sister was a farmer, and so we would go out to the farm, which I didn't like, but we went out anyway. I liked my aunt and uncle, but I didn't like farm life. So I met the daughters primarily in grammar school. For the main part, I believe I had good sisters. I learned well. We had lots of activities and stuff. And for me, I think I started to feel a special draw to the daughters during those 7th and 8th grade years when, your whole life turns around and you start to look at a future, and it was like you go into crisis. And I had wonderful teachers, both in the 7th grade and 8th grade, people who really took a personal interest. And so I think that's really what began to plant a seed. I never really necessarily thought of joining them, but that was probably the seed that was put. And again, I had wonderful teachers in high school, primarily Sisters of Mercy. But truthfully, after a year in college, I chose to pursue the possibility of religious life, it never occurred to me to enter the Sisters of Mercy, although their mother house was in Burlington. They were diocesan. It's not because I didn't like them. It just never occurred to me because I felt at home with the daughters. So pretty much the vocation, I think, started with the seed probably in the 7th and 8th grade, kind of went underground in high school. And then when I was in college, the interesting thing, probably the person that helped me was a young woman who I had met when I was a junior. The summer after my junior year, I was teaching CCD in the local school. And I partnered with her for the summer Bible school. And she was someone I had never met before. She had just graduated from high school at Mount St. Mary's, which was the private academy for the Sisters of Mercy. And all I knew about her is she was entering the Marist Sisters that summer. 2 years later, when I was at the orientation of college, across the hall, I saw her. And so I went to just talk with her after, and for the main part, most people didn't know of her history, but I did. I just knew she had entered the convent, but here she was. And we just became friends during that year. And I think the seed was growing, and I wasn't sure what to do with that. And one day, probably in late autumn, enough so that our friendship had really flourished, I told her that I was considering entering the Daughters of the Holy Spirit. But I just wasn't sure, because it was funny years with the church. Vatican II had happened while I was in high school. I'd heard some of it. So I was like, it was kind of still hush, I'm thinking about it. And what she said to me at one point was that when she entered, she said, if you even have any thoughts of it, any drawings toward it, she said, all I can tell you is that I spent 2 years of my life there in formation. And she said, I learned more about myself, my God, my people, church, and the world than I could ever learn anywhere. And she said, it will always be a richness for me. So if you have any inclination, you can't lose. And I think that's what allowed me to have the freedom to say, yes, I am going to pursue this. I mean, I had talked with her before I talked with my parents. And so that's how I came to the Daughters. When I first entered, I had already gone to college for 1 year, and I was kind of geared toward mathematics. But I discovered sociology when I was a postulant. The college professors came, and I fell in love with sociology, and decided to change my major to sociology. And so I had a wonderful teacher, primarily one teacher, and who just broadened my horizons, and that whole sense of groups and how groups work together for the good, for the not so good. It just fascinated me. And so I kind of geared toward and graduated from Amherst College with a degree in sociology, but also with a secondary minor of mathematics and teaching in high school. So when I first went out, I began teaching. I taught first in junior high mathematics, and then I taught 1 year in grammar school. Did not like it at all.
Where were you teaching?
I was in the junior high school. I was teaching in Plainville, Connecticut, at Our Lady of Mercy. And then I went to Leominster for 1 year, and I taught in a grammar school setting. And the people of Leominster were wonderful, but because I just didn't fit in a grammar school setting where we had kindergarten through 8th grade and it just was not fun. So then I went to high school to teach in high school in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And I lived in our convent at Fairfield, Connecticut. And we traveled each day, just a little commute from Fairfield into Bridgeport. 2 different worlds for sure. But I taught in high school primarily mathematics, but I also taught sociology, a semester of sociology to the seniors. Going into the school, I was still a relatively new teacher, and I started with a freshman class and was their moderator through their 4 years. I stayed at Cathedral for 4 years. And so I just got to know the kids in a new way. I found I really did enjoy teaching mathematics. I did enjoy the sociology. I even did a little stint of teaching home economics, which I made up as I went along, but it was fun. It was not an experience you want to repeat, but it was fun. And as I was going through, I realized that while I did enjoy teaching a lot, and the kids responded to me, that teaching was not going to be the career that I wanted to have. So I wanted to continue to pursue sociology and to see where all of that would lead. I was certainly in contact with the people in administration, the provincial at the time, with my sociology teacher, who was on the council at the time, and we talked about pursuing education. And they agreed that that would be a good idea for the congregation and for me. So we agreed that I would look into programs for masters in sociology. And so while I was still teaching, I did the research, and I researched UConn and was quite impressed. Went for an interview and was quite impressed. I was at that point seeing myself going into social research, and just seeing how groups, the dynamics of what was going on affected larger issues of policy and things like that. And then the other two places that I was looking into was the University of Notre Dame, and also someone had introduced me to the possibility. They had a great sociology program at the New School for Social Research, the graduate faculty. At the time, as I said, I was still teaching full-time at the high school, and we made a decision that I would start, because I kind of had decided that my two choices really were the University of Notre Dame or the New School for Social Research. And we decided, looking into the programs, that it would be okay if I started part-time at the New School, taken a few courses, because I had already figured out how many we could transfer to the University of Notre Dame if that's in fact where I went. So one day a week, I commuted into New York City with a friend who also was teaching at Cathedral at the time, and it was my last year of teaching there. And one day a week, we commuted after school into the city, and I took one course at the New School for Social Research, and she took a dance class because she was going to be going into dance therapy. We were both going to be going into further studies. And I fell in love with New York, and I fell in love with the New School for Social Research. So it no longer became a possibility for me. Well, it was always possible, but I no longer wanted to transfer to the University of Notre Dame. I was very, very fortunate. The province, the congregation, was very good to me and agreed that the next year that they wanted me to pursue the education in a bulk, so I did have 1 year to go to school full-time. I think falling in love with New York was all a piece of going back to my own roots in the city, having grown up in the Queen City of Vermont, where there was much education, higher education, and also, even at that time, a well-known hospital medical center. So it in itself had drawn a lot of people into the city. And I think I just fell back in love with a city that was wide. And also, I just remember being in our commutes, when Michelle and I used to commute into the city, going through the Bronx and going through really some devastated areas. Also going past some of the new buildings that they had done for housing that were almost communities into themselves. I'm forgetting the name of one of the projects that we went through.
Co-op City.
Yes, Co-op City. So just seeing the different possibilities. That first year, that commuting didn't give me the same flavor as that next summer. I actually moved into a convent of other sisters, the Sisters of the Congregation of Notre Dame, I don't remember the name of the number of the street, but it was on one of the streets up in the 30s between 8th and 9th Avenue, and I would walk down. The New School was on, the graduate faculty building that I went to was on 5th Avenue and 14th, and so I would, that summer, I lived with the sisters, for those 6 weeks, and my classes were always at night. And I would walk down to the graduate faculty, and just the variety of people, the life of the people, realizing that our world contained very wealthy people in their limousines and incredible beauty, but also the person that was living on the street and was passed out or was just sleeping there. The little church in that parish, it was St. Columba's Parish, was just a variety of everybody. It was really poorer people, but a variety of people. And it was like our world encompasses all of this, and all of this has such gift. It has such a richness. There's all the art, there's the energy, there's the great joy, there's the human sadness, etc. I just loved that. And it was that first summer I was by myself, and I discovered it in my own relatively quiet way. But then we were very fortunate. Michelle and I got a little one-room studio on East 23rd Street, and we rented this place, and we both went to school. I went down to the new school during the evening classes, and she went up to Hunter for dance therapy during the day. So we were able to manage pretty well in this little one room where during the day our box spring and 2 mattresses were our couch, and at night we pulled it out and they were our beds, and then we put it back in the next day. But the fascination that year was pure gift. Because I was studying, but because I really felt like my congregation sent me to study, and that we had this mission of always being open, available to the needs that were right where we are. And I felt like I needed to do some direct service. I mean, my sociology, all of what I'd learned, it's like some direct service. So what would I do? Well, I ended up doing 2 things. Once a week, I would walk down to Catholic Worker, to the original Catholic Worker place, and I would serve in the soup kitchen. So I spent a morning there. We had the most marvelous cook who had been a street person himself. He just talked, and he used to make his soup, and his name was, well, I don't know what his name was, but we called him Smitty. That's what he went by. I really don't know what his full name was. But he entertained us. He just was great with people, and it's like I fell in love with him. I met one of the most wonderful people I ever knew, who was the wife of a Coast Guard lieutenant, and who introduced me to Governor's Island, where at that time was a Coast Guard base, and they were in Officers Row, so it was like, and I would spend holidays with them. They just invited me there. So I went to the Catholic Worker, and then because we found a church that we really, really loved. We loved the liturgy, we loved the people, the sense of community. And in that church, they had a luncheon program for senior citizens. And so one day after Mass, I would go down and work and help to serve the meals to the senior citizens. And again, just marvelous people, just people who had lived all their lives in the village, older people who came there either for companionship or actually came there because that was probably the only real meal that they got every day. And the city just encompasses all of that. I became very involved with the Caring Community, a social service agency made of the churches and synagogues in Greenwich Village. And at the time, the Caring Community, which already had programs for seniors, was invited to take over the village nursing home. And they approached me asking if I would help in the beginning organizing of that whole effort of a community takeover of the local nursing home. And as a result of that, I ended up staying and working with the board of directors of the Caring Community and the village nursing home for 4 years. It was incredible. I mean, this little person who is shy and doesn't really have any whatever, had afternoon luncheon with Ramsey Clark, who became the honorary chair of the whole project, when it first started. And I was like, I just met, I had meetings at the federal building in downtown. It was such an incredible experience in so many ways. And it was always really, I think for me, it really was that whole sense of administration for social services, for the good, gathering together people. I learned things about community organizing. I learned things about the good and the bad and the not, the middle of everything. And the community came together. It was just such a unique thing. We raised money. I learned stuff about fundraising, which I didn't really want to know, but I learned it anyway. I learned just incredible stuff. It was such a richness for me. It was just, and it fit into being with people where they are, helping to liberate and to bring forth the potential. And really, I didn't even know I would have never thought I had anywhere near any of those gifts. And by myself, I could never do it. But in that group, we did it. Rosalind Carter heard about this, there'd been a little editorial in the Times. She picked it up. She called and invited herself to the Village Nursing Home, came for a board meeting with us, but she was coming for lunch. She said, I will meet with your board. I will have lunch with the residents. And she did. I just had experiences that blew my mind. And I loved New York. I loved New York. I loved being there. I lived first with Michelle and I, and then I lived in a convent with the Sisters of Charity right on Washington Square Park. Our senior center was actually in a building on Washington Square Park, right across from the NYU. And then I lived in my own apartment for about 3.5 years, and it was great because people would come to visit me, or the sisters would come to visit me, and so I would get to show them different parts of New York. My family would come to visit me, and I would get to show them different parts of New York, and they also took me to all kinds of Broadway shows. And it was just an incredible moment in my life, and it was also a moment, I think, of not only the diversity, but the community, the sense of community that I found that I benefited from, and that I hope other people benefited because I was there. And I think that's the sense that we as daughters, it's like you live where you are, like the people, with the people, and you both benefit. That's what community is. That's what community building is. And that for us, in the caring community, it was an ecumenical group. And we shared each other's celebrations of faith. I went to the synagogue for Rosh Hashanah and for different programs. And it was always out of sense of faith that we were being called, that this was a good thing, but it was also a call from God, and that it was something that we could not do. That God was saying, this is how you live out what you say you believe. When Marjorie Tuite came to work with us as a congregation, I think for many of our sisters, she helped us to define service, poverty, and community in a whole new way. But for myself, I don't think I had a definition yet. So she didn't change my mind as much as she helped me to see possibilities. And what she did is she really talked with us about it has to be more than words. She would say, that poverty isn't just living simply but having everything you want but doing it simply. It means being with and experiencing poverty because of the people whose lives you are a part of and learning from them. It's that they're your teachers. It's letting yourself be on the other side and be taught by and putting your body there. It was very clear. It's like putting your body there. Do you want to do this? If you want to listen to the call of Vatican II, of being in a church that says the most important people that we have to pay attention to are the poor, are those who do not have what God has meant for all of us to have, and to actually literally give what you have because it rightfully belongs to them. That those can't be nice words, that they have to be what moves everything, and it has to move you, your body. You can't just talk about it. I grew up relatively I was never poor, without what we needed. Our house was here, and right the next street over were what we called the 10 Commandments and the slums. So it's like, so for me, that was never, it was like a lot of the kids that I went to school with came from those tenements. And the kids that I played with in the neighborhood did that, but it was a sense of, you have to change your mind from, that you do good and actually be and find the goodness that is there and reap from that and share all of it, And then in sociology, we just learn the whole sense of what does it mean for things to belong to all of us, I would object incredibly right now to the language, but to have as your cornerstone that whole sense of no man is an island, no one lives alone, everything that affects anyone affects all of us, and I'm responsible. That philosophy is so much a reality, and I think that's what Marjorie Tuite was saying. It's not a nice song that you sing. You have to live it. And if we in religious life are called to be the prophetic witness, what do you want to witness to? You look at your constitutions and stuff, and what does it say? What do you want to witness to? And she was pretty frank about how we'd better darn well get your bodies there, otherwise it's empty. And I think that's what happened in our province is like some people took it from our heads, some took it from our guts, we took it from all over. But as a province, we really moved into making decisions. We made a decision that if we had priorities of where our sisters would go in mission, that we needed to look at where we were right now and decide what was most important. As I said, when I was teaching in high school, I lived in our convent in Fairfield. We had a very thriving school in Fairfield, Holy Family School, right there by the convent. We traveled over into Bridgeport. The decision was made by the province administration at that time to close some of the schools where we felt, we as a community, was not the primary call. It wasn't that it wasn't good, but we closed Fairfield, we closed West Haven. In Alabama, we had opened up a school in a white section that was more well-to-do. We closed that. In California, decisions were made to divest of the places where we first had originally gone and that were more wealthy. And so, I think what Marjorie did was make everybody think differently. It also it also probably created a lot of people who said, I don't want any part of this, and that all sifted itself out. A lot of people decided, no, that's not where they wanted to put their lifeblood, and so left. Some people really wanted to, and we didn't go far enough. They didn't think we were doing enough of what we needed to do. Probably all of that was true. It was all part of the shakeup. And I think Marjorie Tuite she was an incredible woman on her own right, and she made that her life's challenge to wake people up. We took it to heart. We took it to heart in ways that weren't always easy and in ways that we didn't always necessarily agree upon, but we sure got some conversations out of it, and I think that made us grow. In the last year that I stayed in New York, I found myself having a personal time of searching and reevaluating, because it all came to a real decision, real vocation decision of, in my own life, where is my community, where is my family? I would happily have stayed in that kind of ministry in New York, and I had a sense of community, and I would have, who knows what would have happened, I could have been a single woman with that sense of community and ministry. I think, that's a big thing in religious life. There was a time when you couldn't be in that kind of ministry and community. There wasn't a lot of opportunities for women to do that. But by now there had been. I actually had a personal place where I fit. I loved it. I was appreciated. But I had a community in Connecticut that I would go and visit. I still stayed connected to the community in Bridgeport. I'd take the train and go. Periodically, I would go from New York City to Putnam for meetings and stuff. It's like, okay, you can't do that forever because I'm not with my community. I'm with this whole richness of this community. There's this religious community that I made vows to. And at that point, it was like, and I served as much as I could, and maybe it's time for the vows not to be. I just had a real decision. I remember going through lots of working out, where do I want to be in my future? And ultimately, the decision was that my family was the Daughters of the Holy Spirit. And so it could not continue that I would stay in New York, not have the day-by-day living out my vocation with my sisters. So I came back to Bridgeport it wasn't that I ever left. I never left the Daughters, but I made the decision of where my family, my primary community is. And I think that's an important thing that all of us have to do at different times in our lives, no matter where we are. I'm sure married people do that often enough at different times, and sometimes very, very, in a very unique and significant way, and other times just by the day-by-day living. But if you do have this, if this is your family, there's the day-by-day living that I missed with my own sisters and that I needed to both receive and give to. So I came back. I worked with the Southwest Connecticut Area Agency on Aging, and I was their PR development planner person. And in that agency, we funneled all of the Older Americans Act money throughout the 14 towns of southwestern Connecticut. And so I did a lot of needs assessments and then analyzing the programs. Were we getting the best service for elderly with the monies that we were giving to these various senior programs of all sorts? And again, it was the 14 towns of southwestern Connecticut. So you had the inner city Bridgeport, you had inner city Norwalk, you had fairly well-to-do but average Stratford, you had Greenwich, you had Stamford, where you had both the very, very poor sections of Stamford and the very wealthy, suburban, all the people who got on the train and went into the city and worked in huge paying jobs, etc. So it was great. I mean, I worked with there, and again, it was that whole sense of, we have this amount of funds from the government, all of the Older Americans Act money. And I also learned a lot about bureaucracy, because the Older Americans Act is federal money that went through the state. You had to deal with the state. And then you had all of the, the way in every town it was set up just a little bit differently. So you just work with all of that, and that whole sense of, again, the variety of people that were a part of all of that. So that was just a fantastic experience. And at that point, I think what came back to me, the next call that I really felt is, I went back to, in the 8th grade, my 8th grade teacher, I said my 7th and 8th grade teachers were very significant. My 8th grade teacher was Maria Archambault, who announced to us toward the late winter that she was going to be a missionary to Chile. Now, in 8th grade, we learned a lot of the geography and a little bit of the history of Africa and South America. And you learn that, and it means absolutely nothing to you when you live in Burlington, Vermont, and those are far away, and it means absolutely nothing. And then all of a sudden, the teacher whom I adored, and most of us all really liked, tells us that she's going to be a missionary in Chile. And that blew my mind. And all of a sudden, it wasn't just the words you read in the geography book. It was somebody was going there, and I'm sure I had all of the wrong, I think I must have had in my own mind that she was going to go to these hovels of, the bush country somewhere. I don't know what I thought, but it was just that someone would do that. And while I was in Bridgeport at the Area Agency on Aging, I decided that I'm going to go to Chile. That's my next step. I want to go to Chile, and I had it all planned. I wanted to go to Santiago in the city and to serve. I didn't see myself as a missionary, one of these people who, like Maria, spent 50 years of her life almost. She went there, and many of our missionaries went there, and they gave their whole life, body, blood, and wanted to be there forever. I never saw myself as that. I saw myself, I guess that whole sociologist in me of, if I were to spend I would love to go to Chile and spend 5 years, 8 years of my life there, because it would take me 3 years to figure out what I was doing enough, and then that I would have to learn language, learn culture, just live it. It would take a minimum of 3 years for me to be even that I could give anything back. And so then I would have to stay for at least another 3 to 5 years to just serve. Because I really believed that I would have something that I could give to people, but that my world would be my whole worldview, I would be so enriched by it, that I would never be the same, So it was that whole sense of opening up, because you will never be the same. You will always see things differently. And so I just had this goal that I wanted to go to Chile. So I started taking adult education. In the process of all of that, though, I was asked to be treasurer. And it was like, treasurer, I don't know anything. I've never taken an accounting course in my life. I know nothing. The provincial was Beatrice, and she said, we don't need an accountant. We have an accountant on staff. We need someone who has a sense of the whole, who can help us all to understand, to educate the sisters, but mostly to educate us as the council on the economics and what we have in the numbers. What does that mean in terms of our mission and in terms of our future, etc. And so my dream of going to Chile just didn't happen, but then I became the provincial treasurer. And again, I had a lot of questions, but it was a sense of, really, for me, I think it was a sense of if you're being called to a mission, you're being asked, because this is something that will open up some gifts within you and share it with where there is a need. It's like if we all have gifts, there are lots of needs in our world. How do we match our gifts with the needs? And I'm not so sure I could do that by myself, but I've always been very lucky in having other people help me to do that. So I became treasurer, and I got involved in just as I was learning. I'm still a sociologist filled with all kinds of stuff, and also needs assessment things that I had learned, skills that I'd learned at the Area Agency on Aging. And so I got really involved with corporate responsibility, looking at our investments and doing corporate responsibility. I remember in the beginning years, doing those, learning all about doing proxy voting, and I went to at least 2 different corporation annual meetings and spoke, one time challenging the presence of minorities on the board, and then the presence of women on the board, and how they were using their money. So I went to speak on that, and I just really, and I did some real education in terms of, for our sisters and I just learned things that I had learned a little bit when I was at the New School. I also had done some connecting with the Community Center for Justice and Peace, where they were at that point working on the whole corporate responsibility in South Africa and the apartheid, and using your votes to make corporations either boycott places in South Africa. So all of those things that were a part of me, but tangential or whatever, became more, it's like, this is a forum that I can bring justice issues to the realities of our own financial situation. So doing that, doing a lot of effort of trying to help the sisters to understand more finances, like what their budget means in terms of the larger. Then again, I was so blessed, because it was also the time when we were really more awakening to our internationality and what does it really mean to hold goods in common. It's one thing when you say in a province, it means whatever I get in a salary gets sent to that province, and then that pot there takes care of all of our needs. But it was like, no, we live in this international congregation, and we have missions in Chile. We have missions in Africa that had started originally with the provinces, just like our mission started in Chile, started with North America, with the United States province. Cameroon started in France, Nigeria started in England, and we each were very territorial they were our missions, but all of a sudden we started saying, no, they are our missions. They were daughters of the Holy Spirit. They are the Spirit's mission. They don't even belong to us. They belong to the Spirit who is continually renewing the face of the earth. And so I just got to be part of this international forum. The general treasurer at the time was really strong on, we need to know each other's reality. And so we had international meetings. And it was like, again, I never went to Chile, but I started to learn about Chile in a whole new way. I never went to Nigeria, but I started hearing it, and it started to become mine, and that I was responsible for and that I was enriched by. And as treasurer, I felt like I need to make sure that as much as possible, I just give that message to my sisters. And I've tried to do that. And then I get to work. I was our own treasurer for 9 years and learned incredible amount of stuff. I also learned that even though they told me, you don't need to know anything about accounting, yes, you do. If you're a treasurer, if you're the chief financial officer, you'd better know something about accounting. So I learned a lot about that too. We had, at that point, our rule allowed us to be treasurer for 9 years as the maximum. I got this most fantastic job. Again, I went looking, but it fell into me. With this group in Fall River, there were 3 Dominican groups that were all in process of deciding whether or not they were all smaller or needed to combine their resources. They were all of the same family, Dominican family, but they were very, very different. One was in Fall River, primarily teacher. One was in Newburgh, New York, also primarily teaching. And one was in Ossining, but they were primarily for the sick poor. And they were in process of seeing if they could join together. And what ultimately they did was each dissolve their own congregation and together form a new congregation, which they called the Dominican Sisters of Hope. I worked with them for a year and a half, and I worked hard for them, and I think they appreciated me. But again, the richness that I received from that was fantastic. Well, I started as a counsel in Sister Connie Charette's short-term administration, and then when she was elected to the general council, I then became the provincial here. I think that God gives us so much. It's like you do the best you can, but God just God has filled my world with incredible gifts that never would have probably happened to this little person from Burlington, Vermont, had I done what I thought I was going to do when I was a kid, that I would just grow up and, be a teacher and get married and have a whole bunch of kids, and that would have been wonderful. Whatever would have happened would have been wonderful, but God's gifts have abounded.